How are you guys doing? Today is Sunday, February 6th, 2022. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to preview today's 2022 Pro Bowl for the 2021 NFL season. Today's Pro Bowl is, of course, a fun exhibition game between the league's best that were voted on by media and fan voters. Today is going to take place at 3 o'clock in Las Vegas on ESPN and ABC. And I'm going to preview it by going through the Pro Bowl rosters of the players that were selected initially and the players that were selected as alternates, because the one condition about the Pro Bowl is that if you're competing in the Super Bowl, which is next week, you are excused from participating in the Pro Bowl, but you do get recognized for being a Pro Bowler that season. But as a result, an alternate will take the spot of someone that will not be there for the Super Bowl, or if someone is injured per se. So I'm going to go through both rosters to, of course, go through and acknowledge all of the players that were recognized as the best players in their league. And, of course, for some of them, I have elite profiles, and for some of them, I don't. And I'm going to recognize every single player individually, because being recognized as the best player in your sport in the NFL, where you have hundreds of thousands of people competing for a job in the NFL every single day, it is most definitely not a small feat. And some of these players, even if they're doing it for the first time, or in some cases the 15th time, it is an incredible honor to be named as one of the best players in the National Football League of all professional leagues, the most profitable league in the United States. So going first through the National Football League, the NFC, because they'll be the team on the road because they're playing in the Raiders Stadium. The starting quarterback for the NFC will be the goated starting quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, Aaron Rodgers. This is the 10th time that Aaron Rodgers has been named to the Pro Bowl, as he led the Green Bay Packers to the second best record to the best record in the NFC, actually, as that is how that season ended. He would go on to throw for 4,115 yards. He would finish 10th in the league in passing yards, not to mention that his 68% completion amongst starting quarterbacks would be third amongst active starters that played for an entire season. And he would go on to throw for 37 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. Out of all the players that threw at least 35 touchdowns, and there were 7 of them, he was the only player that threw less than 10. He was the only player that threw single digits. And out of every single player that threw at least 20 touchdowns this year, Aaron Rodgers threw the least amount of interceptions out of all those players. The Green Bay Packers season this year would end up with them losing in the divisional round at home to the San Francisco 49ers. But of course, that's how their season finished, after they were the lone team with the first round bye in the NFC. The reserves at quarterback position in the NFC were Tom Brady, the goated starting quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who most recently retired. This season would be the 15th time that Tom Brady was named to a Pro Bowl. I imagine that is an NFL record, as he would lead the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to the second best record in the NFC. Their season would end up with them losing in the divisional round to the LA Rams, who are currently awaiting the Super Bowl at the moment. Tom Brady would end the season throwing for 5,316 yards. He would lead the NFL in passing yards. He would also lead the NFL in passing touchdowns, as he threw for 43 this season. And he would do also while approaching 45 as a quarterback, and being only a field goal away from the NFC Championship game. So he's going to be one of the reserves at quarterback. And the other reserve who was initially voted in was Kyler Murray, the elite starting quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals. With him being voted into the Pro Bowl, this is the second straight year that Kyler Murray was voted into the Pro Bowl, as he helped the Arizona Cardinals finish with the 5th best record in the NFC. They had the 2nd best record in their division to the LA Rams, who are now competing in the Super Bowl as of right now. The Cardinals season came to an end as they met the LA Rams in the NFC wildcard game. As a passer this season, he would go on to throw for 3,787 yards this season. He was 14th amongst all passers this year. He also ran for 423 yards and 5 touchdowns on the ground, giving him 28 total touchdowns on the day or on the season. And that is how Kyler Murray's season would end up, as the Cardinals were a very hot team for a good chunk of the season because of Kyler Murray's gameplay. And of course, his worst NFL game, his worst football game would come in the wild card, but this season, Kyler Murray most definitely showed that he was a force. He most definitely is a force here in the NFL to stay. Looking at the 2 players in the NFC who were voted alternates at the quarterback position, one of them was Kirk Cousins. The starting quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings out of Michigan State was named to his 3rd career Pro Bowl. The last time he was named was 2019. Kirk Cousins would finish 9th in the NFL in passing yards this season, as he threw for 4,221 yards. He threw for 33 touchdowns against 7 interceptions for a Minnesota Vikings team that would finish just outside of the playoff picture. As they would finish with an 8-9 record, just 1 game worse than the 7th seed Philadelphia Eagles. Like I said, pretty good season that he put together for that team. And the other NFC quarterback that was voted in as an alternate was Russell Wilson, the elite starting quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks. Russell Wilson would be named to his 9th career Pro Bowl. This is the 5th year in a row that he's been named since 2017. He's made it 9 of the last 10 seasons. The only season that he missed was 2016. Even though the Seattle Seahawks would not come anywhere close to doing anything with a playoff bid this season, Russell Wilson went on to throw for 3,113 yards. He threw for 25 touchdowns, which was 11th in the NFL, and he had 6 interceptions, which was the 2nd least in the NFL. He would also run for almost 200 yards and an additional 2 touchdowns for a Seattle Seahawks team that would finish with a 7-10 record, far outside of the playoff picture. But of course, Russell Wilson continuing to show that he is one of the league's best. He was the Walter Payton Man of the Year last year. Taking a look at the Pro Bowlers that were named at the quarterback position on the AFC side, the starting quarterback will be Justin Herbert. Last year's AFC Offensive Rookie of the Year will be named to the Pro Bowl for his very first time, and for his very first time being a starter is a very, very big deal. He would go on to throw over 5,000 yards for a Los Angeles Chargers team that finished just outside of the playoff picture. They finished with a 9-8 record. They finished behind a 9-7-1 Pittsburgh Steelers team. Justin Herbert would be one of 2 quarterbacks that threw for 5,000 yards, the other quarterback being Tom Brady. He threw for 38 touchdowns, which was 3rd in the NFL he threw the 3rd most in the NFL. Not to mention he would throw for 15 interceptions and still end up being the starter. He would be 3rd in the NFL, tied with Josh Allen and Taylor Heineke behind Matthew Stafford and Trevor Lawrence, who led the league, just to get a sense of how well he's been throwing this season. In addition to, what he's been throwing touchdowns and throwing interceptions as well. But considering this is his 2nd season, he's starting in a Pro Bowl, this is an incredibly big deal for him. Looking at his reserve, sitting right behind him is Patrick Mahomes, the elite starting quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs. Is actually getting the chance to play in this Pro Bowl. He is being named to his fourth consecutive Pro Bowl after leading the Chiefs to the second best record in the AFC. Taking a look at where he fared this season, he would finish fourth among all passers in yards as he threw for 4,839 yards. He was tied fourth in the NFL with 37 total passing touchdowns on the season, as he would be tied with Dak Prescott and Aaron Rodgers, the starting quarterback for the NFC. And his 12 total touchdowns would be tied with, his 13 interceptions would be tied with Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Lamar Jackson, and Mack Jones, as they're tied for ninth in the NFL in interceptions thrown. But nonetheless, he would still have a great season, as the Chiefs would start off not too favorably, but they would turn their season around. Their season would come to an end as they ended up losing to the Cincinnati Bengals in the AFC Championship game, just to jog the memory to remember how the Kansas City Chiefs were eliminated. And sitting alongside Patrick Mahomes in the AFC reserves is Lamar Jackson, the elite starting quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens and the NFL's MVP from 2019. This is the second time he's been named to a Pro Bowl, the first time being his MVP season. Lamar Jackson would go on to lead Baltimore to just outside of the playoff picture, as they were a playoff team right before he got hurt. The Ravens finished with an 8-9 record, finishing just below the 9-7-1 Pittsburgh Steelers within their own division. Lamar Jackson would throw for 2,882 yards, and at the same time, he would go on to rush for 767 yards and an additional 2 touchdowns. He had a total of 3,600 yards of offense on the year, as, like I said, he did his best to deal with a depleted Ravens team, and he had some incredible comebacks, one of which I saw in person. And this would be, like I said, the second time he's been named to a Pro Bowl in his NFL career. And the alternative that was named at the quarterback position was Mack Jones, the rookie starting quarterback for the New England Patriots. It, of course, was named to the Pro Bowl for the first time in his career, considering this was his very first full NFL season, as he would help lead the New England Patriots to the 6th best record in the AFC, the 2nd best record in their division, the AFC East, in a season where the Buffalo Bills were incredibly dominant. They only were one game better, or they only finished with one more win. Mac Jones would finish 13th among all passers in the NFL, as he threw for 3,801 yards, 22 touchdowns alongside 13 interceptions in his very first season, turning the Patriots around from a losing team last year to a playoff team and a very formidable one this year. They met their end in the wild card round as they lost by 30 to the AFC East champs, Buffalo Bills. So those are the players that were named at the quarterback position. Looking at the players that were named at running back, jumping back to the NFC, the starting running back will be Dalvin Cook. The elite starting running back out of Florida State is named to his 3rd consecutive Pro Bowl. The Minnesota Vikings would finish the season with the 9th best record in the NFC, as they finished one game short of 9-8. Dalvin Cook would finish with 5th in the NFL in rushing, as he finished with 1,159 yards. He was also 5th in the league in carries. He would finish with 6 touchdowns on the ground, and not to mention that he would also finish with 224 yards through the air, giving him 1,400 total yards of offense for a Minnesota Vikings team that didn't quite make the playoffs. But of course, Dalvin Cook showing that he is a perennial all-star, with Dalvin Cook making this Pro Bowl Yeah, this is the third time he's made it. Looking at the reserves, first was James Conner. This would be the second time that he was named to the Pro Bowl. The last time he was named to the Pro Bowl was when he was on the Pittsburgh Steelers. So this is his first time making a Pro Bowler on the NFC side. For a Arizona Cardinals team that finished with the fifth best record in the NFC, the second best record in the NFC West. James Conner finished 27th in the NFL in rushing yards as he had 752. However, he was tied second in the NFL in rushing touchdowns as he would go on to finish with 15 total rushing touchdowns on the season, tied with Nadia Harris of the New England Patriots as he would go on to help lead his team to the playoffs. He would go on to also finish with 375 yards and 3 touchdowns through the air. So he finished with over 1,000 yards of offense, over 1,100 yards of offense. And he would go on to finish with 18 total touchdowns on the season, which is why he was named to the Pro Bowl. And with this, he is one of the 4 Arizona Cardinals that was named. And the third player that was named at the position was Alvin Kamara. The elite starting running back for the New Orleans Saints would be named to his 5th consecutive Pro Bowl after playing for a Saints team that finished just outside of the playoff picture, as they have the same record as the Eagles, but the Eagles just edged them just with their record. Alvin Kamara would finish 6th in the league in carries. He would finish 14th in the league in rushing yards as he had 898 rushing yards. He also finished with 439 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns. He would go on to finish with about 1,300 total yards of offense and 9 touchdowns for a Saints team that was reeling with its first season without Drew Brees in the starting lineup, as it was dealing with Jameis Winston, Taysom Hill, even Ian Book for a little bit, but Alvin Kamara was the constant on an offense that almost made it right back into the playoffs. So, of course, Alvin Kamara showing that he's one of the best running backs in the league for the 5th year in a row. Looking at the AFC running backs that would be named to the Pro Bowl, the starting running back in the AFC was Jonathan Taylor. The elite starting running back out of Wisconsin would be named to his very first Pro Bowl after being named to the first team All-Pro, being voted the best running back in football this year. Jonathan Taylor would go on to lead all running backs in rushing yards this season and in rushing touchdowns and rushing attempts. He had 332 carries for 1,811 rushing yards and 18 touchdowns, as the Colts finished just outside of the playoff picture with a 9-8 record, finishing half a game behind the 9-7-1 7th seed Pittsburgh Steelers. As, like I said, Jonathan Taylor would make his very first Pro Bowl that season. Not to mention that alongside his 1,811 rushing yards, he would go on to add 360 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. So he had over 2,100 yards of offense and 20 total touchdowns on the year. As without Derrick Henry, he did show that he did put together the best season of any running back this season. Looking at the reserves, sitting on the benches will be Nick Chubb, the elite starting running back for the Cleveland Browns out of Georgia. This will be the 3rd consecutive time that he's been named to the Pro Bowl, as he would put together a pretty solid rushing season for a Cleveland Browns team that finished just outside of the playoff picture with an 8-9 record. Nick Chubb would finish 2nd in the NFL in rushing yards. He had 1,259 yards. He finished 8th in the league in carries. He finished with 8 rushing touchdowns on the season. He also finished with 174 receiving yards and a touchdown, as he had 1,400 total yards of offense and 9 touchdowns for a Cleveland Browns team that finished just outside of the playoff picture. The third reserve in the AFC would be Joe Mixon, who will be playing in the Super Bowl, so they had to get an alternate reserve. But Joe Mixon would be named to the Pro Bowl for the very first time in his NFL career, as he would put together a pretty solid team for a Bengals team that finished 4th in the AFC and would finish with the best record in the AFC North. He finished 3rd in the NFL in rushing attempts, 3rd in rushing yards, and 4th in rushing touchdowns. He would finish with 1,205 rushing yards, 13 rushing touchdowns, 314 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns. That's 1,500 total yards and 16 total touchdowns for a Cincinnati Bengals team that just made it into the Super Bowl. Great debut Pro Bowl season for Joe Mixon. For what he's done. And then the alternate will be Nadia Harris, because Joe Mixon will be playing in the Super Bowl. Nadia Harris, the rookie running back for the Pittsburgh Steelers, will be named into his very first Pro Bowl, because of course that's how rookie seasons work. Nadia Harris would finish the season with the 4th most rushing yards on the season, alongside the 2nd most carries. He would go on to have 7 touchdowns alongside his 1,200 rushing yards in his very first season. He had 467 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. He had 1,667 total yards and 10 touchdowns in his debut season in Ben Roethlisberger's final season for a Pittsburgh Steelers team that finished with the 7th seed. Their season came to an end in the wild card round as they lost by 3 touchdowns to the Kansas City Chiefs, as Nadia Harris would not fumble all year in the regular season, but he would fumble against the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs. Nonetheless, being named a Pro Bowler in his rookie season, he is one of 4 Pittsburgh Steelers being represented in the Pro Bowl. Now, taking a look at the fullback position, the fullback named in the NFC was Kyle Juszczyk out of the San Francisco 49ers, or Juszczyk. Kyle Juszczyk. He would be named to his 6th consecutive Pro Bowl after putting together a pretty solid season for a San Francisco 49ers team that would finish with the 6th best record in the NFC, the 3rd best record in the NFC West. Their season would come to an end in the NFC Championship round against the Los Angeles Rams. I almost said the St. Louis Rams. And then in the AFC, the player that was named at the fullback position was Patrick Ricard for the Baltimore Ravens. This would be the 3rd consecutive year he was named, as he put together a really solid Pro Bowl level performance from a Baltimore Ravens team that finished with an 8-9 record just outside of the playoff picture. Looking at the players that are going to be taking up the wide receiver position, looking first at the NFC. Starting in the NFC will be Cooper Kupp and Devonte Adams. Starting with Cooper Kupp, the elite wide receiver for the LA Rams out of Eastern Washington, will be named to his very first Pro Bowl, even though he will not be competing because he'll be in the Super Bowl. Cooper Kupp would put together one of the best receiving seasons in NFL history. He will go on to lead the NFL in receptions, yards, and touchdowns. He had 145 receptions, 1,947 receiving yards, and 16 touchdowns, as he averaged almost a receiving touchdown per game for a Rams team that would finish with the best record in the NFC West. And he would go on to add 18 yards on the ground. So he had 1,965 total yards of offense. This, like I said, for this being his very first time being named in the Pro Bowl, of course, very solid. The other starter named in the NFC was Devonte Adams. The elite starting wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers would be named for his 5th consecutive year, as he would put together a Pro Bowl season for a Green Bay Packers team that finished with the best record in the NFC. And they would meet their end in the divisional round at home against the San Francisco 49ers. Devonte Adams would finish 2nd in the NFL in receptions. He had 123 of them. He finished 3rd in the NFL in receiving yards. He had 1,553 of them. He had 11 receiving touchdowns on the year. And like I said, he would do his best to lead the Packers as far as he could. He even took up half of their receptions in the NFC divisional game against the 49ers. But of course, congratulations to Devonte Adams. It's it's not easy to make it to half a decade's worth of Pro Bowls in a row. The reserves in the NFC, starting off in Minnesota, they start off with Justin Jefferson. The elite starting wide receiver out of LSU would be named to his second consecutive Pro Bowl in his second season in the NFL, after putting together a Pro Bowl season for a Minnesota Vikings team that finished just outside of the playoff picture with an 8-9 record, one game behind the 8th seed Philadelphia Eagles. Justin Jefferson would go on to finish second in the league with receiving yards with 1,616. He had the second most receiving yards in a Minnesota Vikings season. He finished fourth in the NFL in receptions with 108 of them. He finished tied sixth in the league with double-digit touchdowns, as alongside his 10 receiving touchdowns, he sat alongside Adam Thielen, his own teammate, and Stefan Diggs, who used to be a Minnesota Viking, as the players who are tied for sixth in the NFL in receiving touchdowns. Another wide receiver named to the NFC was the starting wide receiver for the San Francisco 49ers, Debo Samuel, out of South Carolina. He was named to the Pro Bowl for the very first time in his NFL career. Debo Samuel was tied for 24th in the NFL in receptions with 77 of them. He finished fifth in the league in receiving yards with 1,405 yards, as he led the NFL in yards per catch, averaging 18.2 yards a catch, averaging almost 2 first downs per catch. As he finished with 6 receiving touchdowns. Not to mention that he finished with 365 yards on the ground and 8 rushing touchdowns. He would go on to finish with almost 1,800 total yards of offense, over 100 yards per game of all-purpose yards, and he finished with 14 total touchdowns for a San Francisco 49ers team that would finish with the 6th best record in the NFC. So, of course, pretty solid season that Debo Samuel put together. And then because Cooper Kupp is going to be competing in the Pro Bowl, the NFC was able to name 2 alternates. First of them will be Mike Evans, the elite starting wide receiver for the for the Super Bowl 55 champs, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the defending champs. Will be named to his 4th Pro Bowl in his NFL career. The last time he was named to one was 2019. This season, Mike Evans would become the first NFL player to start his career with 8 straight 1,000-yard receiving seasons. He would go on to finish 23rd in the NFL in receiving yards for a Tampa Bay Buccaneers team that finished with the 2nd best record in the NFC. He would finish with 74 receptions, tied for 29th in the league, and he finished with 23rd in the league with 1,035 yards. He was 2nd in the NFL, however, in receiving touchdowns, as he had 14. The only player that he trailed was Cooper Kupp, who had an out-of-body performance this entire season, as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers met their end at the divisional round to the LA Rams. Mike Evans is one of 9 Tampa Bay Buccaneers that are being represented, as the Buccaneers are the most represented team in the Pro Bowl this year. And the other alternate named in the NFC at wide receiver was CeeDee Lamb. The young starting wide receiver for the Dallas Cowboys in his 2nd season would be named to his very first Pro Bowl of his NFL career. CeeDee Lamb would go on to finish with the 16th most yards in the NFL. He had 79 receptions for 1,102 yards and 6 touchdowns for a Dallas Cowboys team that finished with the 3rd best record in the NFC. He would be one of 6 Dallas Cowboys to actually make the team this year. And taking a look at the wide receivers that are representing the AFC, the 2 starters that were named were Tyreek Hill and Jamar Chase. Tyreek Hill, the elite starting wide receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs, would be named to his 6th consecutive Pro Bowl. And to make it a 6 consecutive Pro Bowls, of course, no easy feat. And, of course, this being Tyreek Hill's 6th season in the NFL, considering the first season he was a Pro Bowler was 2016. That was the year that he was drafted. Tyreek Hill would put together a Pro Bowl performance, and he would finish with the 7th most receiving yards in the league for a Kansas City Chiefs team that would finish with the 2nd best record in the AFC, as they would meet their end in the AFC Championship game to the Cincinnati Bengals. The former champ, Tyreek Hill, would finish 3rd in the NFL in receptions with 111 of them. He had 1,239 receiving yards alongside 9 touchdowns. He was tied for 9th in the NFL in touchdowns. He would also add 96 yards on the ground, giving him at least 1,300 total yards of offense, as he was a very vital part of the Kansas City Chiefs, who really turned it around. And he was a big part of one of the most impressive playoff games that we've ever seen from a football team. And then alongside him is going to be Jamar Chase, the elite young wide receiver out of LSU, will be named to his very first Pro Bowl in his NFL career after he was named to the 2nd team All-Pro this year. He would go on to, or in his rookie season, he would finish 4th in the NFL in receiving yards. He had 1,455 of them. Alongside his 81 receptions, he was tied 20th in the NFL in receptions. He finished 3rd in the NFL in receiving touchdowns, as he finished with 13 of them. The only 2 players that finished above him were Mike Evans and Cooper Kupp. He was doing all this for a Cincinnati Bengals team that won the AFC North with a 10-7 record, one of 2 teams in their division that made the playoffs. He would, of course, represent. He's one of 3 Cincinnati Bengals that would make the Pro Bowl alongside Joe Mixon in that offense, as he, of course, would have to be replaced by an alternate. So the AFC has 2 alternates at the position. Looking at the reserves, being named to his 2nd straight Pro Bowl is Stefan Diggs, the elite starting wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills, who won the AFC North and met their end in the AFC divisional round to the Kansas City Chiefs. Stefan Diggs would go on to finish tied for 6th in the NFL in touchdowns with 10 of them. He finished 8th in the NFL in receiving yards with 1,225, and he finished tied 9th in the league with 103 receptions, as he was, of course, one of 10 receivers in the NFL to have at least 100 receptions on the year, tied with Hunter Renfrow. So, of course, Stefan Diggs would be named, and sitting alongside him was Keenan Allen. The elite starting wide receiver for the Los Angeles Chargers would be named to his 5th consecutive Pro Bowl, making it to half a decade's worth of Pro Bowls consecutively is no easy feat. Keenan Allen would finish 7th in the league in receptions with 106 of them. He finished 13th in the league in receiving yards, as he had 1,138 of them, and he had 6 receiving touchdowns for a Los Angeles Chargers team that finished just outside of the AFC playoff picture. But he did all this for one of 2 quarterbacks in football that threw for over 5,000 yards on the season, just to get a sense of how dynamic or how often Keenan Allen has been receiving the ball. And then looking at the alternates that were named in the AFC, named from the Las Vegas Raiders named for the hometown Las Vegas Raiders, where the game is going to be played, is Hunter Renfrow. Hunter Renfrow being named for his very first time out of Clemson after he's one of 4 Las Vegas Raiders to be named. He would be one of 10 players in the NFL that finished with at least 100 receptions, as he had 103 of them. He had 1,038 receiving yards on the season, and he would be tied 9th in the NFL with 9 receiving touchdowns for a Las Vegas Raiders team that finished with the 5th best record in the AFC. They met their end in the first round thanks to a field goal kick. They lost to the team that would eventually go on to win the AFC, the Cincinnati Bengals. The other AFC alternate at wide receiver would be Deontay Johnson for the Pittsburgh Steelers. The starting wide receiver out of Toledo would be named to his very first Pro Bowl appearance. He is one of four Pittsburgh Steelers that would be named this season. Deontay Johnson would go on to finish with the 10th most receiving yards in the NFL. He was tied for 5th with the most receptions as he had 107 of them. He had 1,161 yards. He was tied 16th in the NFL with 8 receiving touchdowns for a Pittsburgh Steelers team that finished with the 7th most receiving, or they finished with the 7th best record in the AFC and would just go on to crack the playoff picture. So those are the players that would be named. Taking a look at the tight end position, the starting tight end for the NFC will be George Kittle. The elite starting wide receiver out of Iowa would be named to his 3rd Pro Bowl. He was not named in 2020, but he was named in 2019 and in the year before that in 2018. He would finish with the 4th most receiving yards out of tight ends this season. He finished 31st among all receivers this season in yards. He had 71 receptions for 910 yards, and he had 6 touchdowns on the year. And he also did other things because, of course, he is the best blocking tight end in football as well. For a San Francisco 49ers team, that would finish with the 6th best record in the NFC and would meet their end in the NFC Championship versus the NFC West champs, the LA Rams. Of course, this being George Kittle's 3rd time being named as a Pro Bowler at the tight end position. Of course, no surprise to many. And the tight end reserve in the NFC will be Kyle Pitts, the rookie elite tight end for the Atlanta Falcons. This being his very first season, he was named to the Pro Bowl. Kyle Pitts would go on to finish 3rd among all tight ends in receiving this year, as he would be one of 3 tight ends to finish with 1,000 yards. He had 68 receptions for 1,026 yards, and he only had 1 receiving touchdown on the year. He finished 24th among all receivers in yards this season, as he did lead the Atlanta Falcons in receiving yards this year at the tight end position. He was the highest drafted tight end ever as well. He is one of 2 Atlanta Falcons that is being represented in this Pro Bowl. Looking in the AFC side at the 2 players that are going to be representing the AFC at the tight end position, the starting tight end will be Mark Andrews. The starting tight end for the Baltimore Ravens out of Oklahoma will be named to his 2nd Pro Bowl. The first year he was named was 2019 when Lamar Jackson won the MVP. He would go on to finish with the most receiving yards amongst tight ends. He would finish tied 5th in the NFL in receptions with 107 of them. He was the only tight end with 100 receptions. He was one of 10 players in the NFL with 100 receptions. He had 1,361 yards, and he was tied for 9th in the NFL with 9 touchdowns. Among tight ends, he would be 3rd he would be tied with Travis Kelce and Hunter Henry for the most touchdowns among tight ends, and Dawson Knox of the Buffalo Bills as well, just to get a sense of how many touchdowns he was getting and how Mark Andrews has really jumped onto the scene as one of the best tight ends this year. And the reserve in the AFC will be Travis Kelce, the elite starting tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs, who will actually get a chance to play in the Pro Bowl this year. They will be named to the Pro Bowl for his 7th consecutive year at the tight end position, which is, of course, no laughing feat. He will go on to finish 2nd among tight ends in receptions and yards. He had 92 receptions for 1,125 yards, and he's tied for the top with tight ends with the top 4 tight ends in receiving touchdowns, as he had 9 for a Kansas City Chiefs team that would finish with the 2nd best record in the AFC and would meet their end in the AFC Championship game to a field goal from the Cincinnati Bengals. And not to mention, he was a big part of the Chiefs' incredible comeback to beat the Buffalo Bills in the crazy 13-second drive, as he is one of 6 Kansas City Chiefs players being represented in this game. Those are the tight ends. Now taking a look at the NFC offensive line as a whole before I get to the AFC offensive line. Looking at the starting offensive line, going from looking at the tackles on the NFC, representing one of the tackles will be Trent Williams for the Washington Commanders. He will be playing in his 9th Pro Bowl, as he made it in 2020 as well. The other player that will be manning the offensive line will be Tristan Wirfs, the starting offensive tackle for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who was drafted in 2020, now playing in his second season, will be playing in his very first Pro Bowl after playing for a Buccaneers team that finished with the second best record in the NFC and met their end against the LA Rams in the divisional round. Looking at the players that are going to be starting at the offensive guard, on one side, he's going to have Zach Martin, the veteran out of Notre Dame, will be playing in his 7th Pro Bowl, as he's made 7 of the last 8. The only one he's missed since 2014 was 2020, as he's done his job for a Dallas Cowboys team that would win the NFC East and finish with the 3rd seed. They would meet their end in the first round to the San Francisco 49ers, as the Cowboys were the only team to lose at home in the wild card. In addition to Zach Martin, the other player manning the offensive guard position will be Brandon Sheriff of the Washington football team from 2021, who will now be playing for the Washington Commanders this upcoming season. He's been playing the veteran from Iowa will be named in his 5th Pro Bowl. He will be named in his 3rd consecutive. He's made 5 of the last 6 Pro Bowls, and this being his 7th season in the NFL, to get a sense of how good he's been playing. Great consistency. And of course, the starting center will be Jason Kelce. The starting center for the Philadelphia Eagles will be named to his 5th Pro Bowl in his NFL career. He has now made this will be his 3rd consecutive Pro Bowl that he's made, and he's been playing since 2021, just to get a sense of how well he's been playing. The Eagles were a team that just squeaked into the playoffs. They would end up losing in the first round to the 2nd seed defending champs, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, by 2 touchdowns in the first round, just to get a sense there. Looking at the reserves, the reserve at offensive tackles, or the reserves at offensive tackle will be Tyron Smith. The starting offensive tackle for the Dallas Cowboys will be named to his 8th Pro Bowl. The last time he made the Pro Bowl was 2019, and when he made the 2019, that was his 7th straight. He's made 8 of the last 9 Pro Bowls, to get a sense of his consistency for a Dallas Cowboys team that still finished with the best record in their own division. One of the 3 alternates that was named was Dwayne Brown of the Seattle Seahawks. This year, he was named to his 5th Pro Bowl in his career. That started in 2008. The last time he made the Pro Bowl was 2007. The Seattle Seahawks would finish with a 7-10 record, as they finished with 2 less wins than the 7-seed Philadelphia Eagles. Another alternate at the offensive tackle position in the NFC was Brian O'Neill for the Minnesota Vikings. He will go on to be named to his 1st Pro Bowl after this being his 4th season in the NFL, for a Minnesota Vikings team that would fall 1 win short of making the playoffs this season. And then the last alternate at the offensive tackle position in the NFC was DJ Humphries for the Arizona Cardinals. The offensive tackle out of Florida will go on to make his 1st Pro Bowl after he made his very first season. He made his very first debut. He was a 1st-round pick in 2015. He did all this for a Cardinals team that would go on to make the playoffs this year. Looking at the offensive guard reserves, starting off in Tampa Bay for the defending champs Buccaneers, Ali Marpet out of Hobart would be named to his very first Pro Bowl, this being a 2nd-round pick out of the 2015 draft for the Buccaneers team that would finish with the 2nd-best record in the NFC. One of the alternates that was named was Jonah Jackson for the Detroit Lions, who would finish with the very worst record in the NFC. He would be the only player for the Detroit Lions that would be named, and this would be the very first time he was named, this being his 2nd season in the NFL. And the other alternate that would be named would be Laken Tomlinson, the starting guard for the San Francisco 49ers out of my alma mater, Duke University. After being a first-round pick in 2015, this is the very first time that Laken Tomlinson has been named a Pro Bowler in his NFL career. Looking at the reserves at the center position, sitting behind Jason Kelce will be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers center Ryan Jensen. Who made his debut in 2013 with the Baltimore Ravens, and is a champion with the Buccaneers as of last year, is now a Pro Bowler for the very first time in his NFL career. And the alternate that was named at the position was Alex Mack of the San Francisco 49ers. The starting center would be named to his 7th Pro Bowl. The last time he was named to the Pro Bowl was in 2018. And, of course, considering the consistency at the position, these are the players that would be named on the offensive line of the NFC. Looking at the players in the AFC that would be named on the offensive side to the Pro Bowl, starting on one side, looking at the starting offensive line, I'm looking at Rashawn Slater for the Los Angeles Chargers. Playing currently in his rookie season, Rashawn Slater would be named to his very first Pro Bowl after playing in his very first season out of Northwestern for a Los Angeles Chargers team that would finish right outside the AFC playoff picture with a 9-8 record. Sitting alongside on the other side would be Orlando Brown Jr. of the Kansas City Chiefs. Him, after making his start in 2018, this will be the third straight year that Orlando Brown Jr. out of Oklahoma will make the Pro Bowl in his first 4 seasons in the NFL for a Kansas City Chiefs team that finished with the second best record in the AFC, and they finished they would finish just a field goal shy of making this year's Super Bowl. Taking a look at the 2 players named at the offensive guard position in the AFC. On one side, they have Quentin Nelson. They're the Indianapolis Colts now veteran Pro Bowler who's made his 4th straight Pro Bowl in his 4th straight season out of Notre Dame. And sitting alongside him will be Joel Bitonio of the Cleveland Browns. He will be named to his 4th consecutive Pro Bowl after making his debut in 2014. He would do all this for a Cleveland Browns team that would finish with an 8-9 record just outside of the playoff picture. The starting center will be Corey Linsley, the Los Angeles Chargers starting center, who in his very first season playing on the Los Angeles Chargers after playing 6 years with the Packers, will go on to make his very first Pro Bowl ever. So, of course, after 7 seasons with the Packers, he will go on to make his very first Pro Bowl in his very first season with the Chargers and be a starter nonetheless. The Pro Bowl reserve for the offensive tackle position would be Deion Dawkins of the Buffalo Bills. The second-round pick from the 2017 draft will be named to his very first Pro Bowl after holding his own for a Buffalo Bills team that would win the AFC East and eventually meet their end in the AFC Championship game at Arrowhead to the Kansas City Chiefs in overtime. The reserve at offensive guard will be Wyatt Teller for the Cleveland Browns that just missed the playoffs. After being a 5th-round pick in 2018, Wyatt Teller would be named to his 2nd Pro Bowl in his NFL career after he would be named to the 2nd team All-Pro for the 2nd consecutive season in his career. And then the alternate at the offensive guard will be Roger Saffold of the Tennessee Titans. The player who made his debut in 2010, the 2nd-round pick, will be named to his first ever Pro Bowl. He was named to the 2nd team All-Pro in 2017. That was the last time he was ever recognized for being one of the best players, at least at the guard position. But this would be the very first time he would get Pro Bowl recognition. And then the reserve at center in the AFC will be Ryan Kelly. The veteran out of Alabama who was the 1st-round pick in 2016, will be making his 3rd consecutive Pro Bowl appearance after playing for an Indianapolis Colts team that finished with a 9-8 record and finished just outside, and as he was the mid-central blocker to help Jonathan Taylor finish with one of the best rushing seasons in NFL history. So that is how Ryan Kelly's season would finish. These are all the players that were named to the offensive side to the Pro Bowl team. Looking now on the defensive side to the players that would be recognized as the best defensive players in the sport. Jumping out to the defensive end, the starting defensive ends on the NFC side will be Nick Bosa and Brian Burns. Nick Bosa, the elite starting defensive end for San Francisco out of Ohio State, will be named to his second Pro Bowl in his NFL career. The last one he made was in 2019. This season, Nick Bosa would go on to finish with 15 and a half sacks. He finished fourth in the NFL in sacks for a San Francisco 49ers team that would finish with the sixth best record in the NFC. They would make it all the way to the NFC Championship game where they would lose to the Los Angeles Rams. So they were one of the last four teams remaining. Nick Bosa was a very big part of the reason that they were there. So, of course, Nick Bosa being recognized for that. And then the other player that will be starting on the defensive end, it will be Brian Burns. The starting defensive end for the Carolina Panthers, who was the first-round draft pick in 2019, will be named to his very first Pro Bowl in his NFL career. Burns finished the season tied 9th in the NFL, or tied 20th in the NFL in sacks, as he had 9 of them for a Carolina Panthers team that finished outside of the playoff picture. They finished with a 5-12 record. He is one of 2 Carolina Panthers that would be named to the Pro Bowl this season. At the reserve position, the player that was named was Cameron Jordan. The elite defensive end for the New Orleans Saints would go on to finish tied 7th in the NFL in sacks with 12 and a half of them. He went on to finish tied for 12 and a half with Aaron Donald, the goated starting defensive tackle for the Rams, and Matthew Judon, the elite linebacker for the New England Patriots. However, Cameron Jordan did all this for a Saints team that finished with a 9-8 record. They finished just outside of the playoff picture. He would go on to finish with a couple of forced fumbles, as well as he also defended 6 passes. Did his best for a Saints team that finished just outside of the playoff picture. And then the alternate that was named at the defensive end position in the NFC would be Josh Sweat of the Philadelphia Eagles. The 4th round draft pick from 2018 would be named to his very first Pro Bowl. Josh Sweat would finish the season with 7.5 sacks, tied for 35th in the league, as he would also force a fumble for a Philadelphia Eagles team that finished with the 7th best record in the NFC. He would go on to be one of 5 Philadelphia Eagles represented in this NFC Pro Bowl roster. And then on the AFC side, the players representing the defensive end, the starters will be Myles Garrett and Max Crosby. Myles Garrett, the elite starting defensive end for the Cleveland Browns, the former number 1 overall pick out of Texas A&M, will be named to his 3rd Pro Bowl in his career in his first 5 seasons in the NFL. Myles Garrett would go on to finish with the 3rd most sacks in the NFL, as he had 16 of them for a Cleveland Browns team that finished just outside of the playoff picture with an 8-9 record. He would go on to finish with a forced fumble and a fumble recovery as well. He would put together a virtuoso season, and sitting right across him would be Max Crosby, the starting defensive end out of Eastern Michigan for the Las Vegas Raiders, would be named to his very first Pro Bowl this season. Max Crosby would go on to finish tied for 31st in the league in sacks, as he had 8 of them. He would also go on to finish with about 56 total tackles, doing all this for a Las Vegas Raiders team that finished with the 5th best record in the AFC, as they would meet their end in the AFC wildcard game on a field goal to the current AFC champs, Cincinnati Bengals. But Max Crosby being named to his first Pro Bowl, of course, very big for him. He is, of course, one of 4 hometown Las Vegas Raiders being represented in this game. The reserve that was originally voted was Trey Hendrickson of the Cincinnati Bengals. The starting defensive end out of Florida Atlantic would be named to his very first Pro Bowl in his NFL career. Trey Hendrickson would finish 5th in the NFL in sacks, as he had 14 of them alongside his 2 forced fumbles, or he would go on to finish with 3 forced fumbles on the year. And he would put together 34 total tackles for a Cincinnati Bengals team that would finish at the top of the AFC North. And for a team that's already in the Super Bowl, he was one of 3 players that was recognized as a Pro Bowl player alongside Joe Mixon and Jamar Chase. Trey Hendrickson, like I said, the very first time he was named to a Pro Bowl, so I know the Rams are definitely aware of Trey Hendrickson. But because Trey Hendrickson won't be able to play in the Pro Bowl today, his alternate will be Frank Clark of the Kansas City Chiefs. Frank Clark would be named to his 3rd consecutive Pro Bowl. The elite defensive end out of Michigan would help the Kansas City Chiefs finish with the 2nd best record in the AFC. Frank Clark would finish the season with 4.5 sacks, tied for 80th in the league. He would also go on to force a couple of fumbles as well, as he finished with 22 total tackles, leading a Kansas City Chiefs unit. And he would be one of 6 Kansas City Chiefs that would be voted into the Pro Bowl this season. And taking a look at the defensive tackle position, jumping back to the NFC, the starting defensive tackles will be Aaron Donald and Jonathan Allen. Aaron Donald, the GOATed starting defensive tackle for the Los Angeles Rams, will be voted to his 8th consecutive Pro Bowl in his 8th season in the NFL. Aaron Donald will, of course, be playing in the Super Bowl, so he won't be playing. He will go on to finish the regular season with the most sacks among defensive tackles by 2.5. He would finish with 12.5 sacks on the year amongst his 38 tackles, as he would go on to force 4 fumbles on the year. He did all this for an LA Rams team that finished with the 4th best record in the NFC and would power their way past the San Francisco 49ers in the NFC Championship game to make it all the way to the Super Bowl. But since Aaron Donald won't be playing, the only starter that was actually named would be Jonathan Allen, the starting defensive tackle for the Washington football team, now Washington Commanders. And the 1st round draft pick from 2017 will be named to the Pro Bowl for the very first time in his NFL career. Jonathan Allen would go on to be tied 20th in the NFL in sacks, as he had 19 of them at the defensive tackle position. Out of Alabama, he would go on to finish with 62 tackles on the year, as the Washington football team would finish their season with a 7-10 record. Last time they'll be known as the Washington football team officially. But amongst defensive tackles, he, of course, is tied with Chris Jones for the 2nd most the 3rd most sacks amongst defensive tackles this season, to get a sense of what he's done to earn his very first Pro Bowl bid. The reserve that was named at that position was Kenny Clark for the Green Bay Packers. He would be named to his 2nd Pro Bowl. The last time he was named was 2019, and him being a 1st round draft pick for 2016. Kenny Clark will go on to finish with 27 tackles, 4 sacks, and a fumble recovery this season for a Green Bay Packers team that did earn a 1st round bye. He is one of 3 Packers that was named, as the other 2 Packers were Aaron Rodgers and Devonte Adams. So, of course, big honor to be Kenny Clark in that position. So because Aaron Donald would be in the Super Bowl, they had to name 2 alternates. Their first alternate would be Javon Hargrave for the Philadelphia Eagles out of South Carolina State. He would be named after being a 3rd round draft pick in 2016. This would be the very first time that Hargrave would be named a Pro Bowler this season. And taking a look at how Hargrave would fare this season, he would go on to finish with 7.5 tackles, or 7.5 sacks, which is pretty high amongst the defensive tackles this year. He would go on to be tied 35th among all defenders in sacks this year, as he was also able to force a fumble for an Eagles team that was just able to squeeze their way into the 7th seed. They would meet their end in the NFC wildcard round as they lost by 2 touchdowns to the defending champs, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, and the other alternate named at the defensive tackle position was Vita Vea. The starting defensive tackle for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers out of Washington would be named to his very first Pro Bowl after being a first-round draft pick in 2018. Vita Vea would have a very solid season for himself. Vita Vea would be tied 92nd in the entire league in sacks as he finished with 4 of them on the year. He was also able to recover a fumble, and he, of course, did his part with his 33 tackles for a Tampa Bay Buccaneers team that would dominate the NFC South and would meet their end to a field goal. They would meet their end with a field goal from the LA Rams on the very last play of the NFC divisional game. Taking a look now at the AFC players that were named to the defensive tackle position at the Pro Bowl, the starters will be DeForest Buckner and Chris Jones. DeForest Buckner, for the starting defensive tackle out of Oregon for the Indianapolis Colts, will be named to his 2nd Pro Bowl in his NFL career. The last time he was named was 2018, and in that time, he was named 2nd Team All-Pro in 2019, and he was named 1st Team All-Pro in 2020. So, of course, he has been showing that he has been capable of being that defensive tackle, especially over that 4-year span. DeForest Buckner would go on to finish this season with 7 sacks on the season, which is a lot for a defensive tackle in a 17-game season. He would finish with 68 total tackles for an Indianapolis Colts team that just missed the mark and missed the playoffs with a 9-8 record. And then sitting alongside him will be Chris Jones, the elite defensive tackle for the Kansas City Chiefs, will be named to his 3rd consecutive Pro Bowl, and he's made 3 Pro Bowls in his career since he was a 2nd-round draft pick out of 2016. Chris Jones would be tied with Jonathan Allen for 3rd amongst defensive tackles in sacks this season. He would finish with 9 sacks as he played 14 games for a Kansas City Chiefs team that finished with the 2nd-best record in the AFC. They would go all the way to the AFC Championship where they would end up losing to the Cincinnati Bengals. And he would go on to force a fumble and recover a fumble this season as well. As, like I said, he would go on to earn his 2nd Pro Bowl appearance. And not to mention that in the time since his last Pro Bowl, he would go on to win a Super Bowl too. Looking at the reserve position, the player that was originally named as the AFC reserve at defensive tackle was Cameron Hayward. The elite defensive tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers would be named to his 5th consecutive Pro Bowl after he was named to the 1st Team All-Pro for the 3rd time in his career this year. He would go on to finish 2nd among defensive tackles in sacks this season. He was one of 2 defensive tackles that had double-digit sacks this year. He had 10 sacks and 53 tackles for a Pittsburgh Steelers team that just squeaked into the playoff picture with a 9-7-1 record. Their one tie coming against the Detroit Lions this season. As the Pittsburgh Steelers, he was one of 4 Pittsburgh Steelers that was named to the Pro Bowl this season. He would also finish with a forced fumble, a fumble recovery, and an interception for the Pittsburgh Steelers this year. And then alongside those 2, the alternate that was named would be Jeffrey Simmons, the defensive tackle for the Tennessee Titans, after he was a 1st-round draft pick in 2019. With this being his 3rd year in the NFL, this would be the very first time he was selected to the Pro Bowl, as he was selected to the 2nd Team All-Pro for the very first time in his NFL career as well. Jeffrey Simmons would finish with 8.5 sacks as a defensive tackle, literally averaging half of a sack a game. Or averaging a sack every other game. Same thing. He finished with 54 tackles on the year. He would go on to, he would put together a very solid season, even put together 6 passes defended at the defensive tackle position as he earned his way to becoming a Pro Bowler at the position for the very first time. Sitting alongside these guys, jumping out to the outside linebacker position, starting off in the defensive side. The two players that are going to be starting are going to be Chandler Jones of the Arizona Cardinals and Robert Quinn of the Chicago Bears. Chandler Jones of the Arizona Cardinals will be named to his 4th Pro Bowl in his NFL career after he was a first-round pick in 2012. The last time he made the Pro Bowl was in 2019. This season, Chandler Jones would go on to finish with 10.5 sacks in 15 games for an Arizona Cardinals team that would finish with the 5th seed in the NFC West, second best record in their division. He would finish with 41 tackles. He had 10.5 sacks, 6 forced fumbles, and a fumble recovery all in that span. The Cardinals would end up meeting there into the Los Angeles Rams in the wild card. He is one of 4 Arizona Cardinals that was selected. Chandler Jones will, of course, be sharing the outside linebacker position with Robert Quinn. The starting outside linebacker for the Chicago Bears will go on to finish with the 2nd most sacks in the NFL this season. He would finish with 18.5 sacks, all of this in 16 games played for a Chicago Bears team that fell outside of the playoff picture. They finished with a 6-11 record. However, Quinn finished with 18.5 sacks and 4 forced fumbles for that Bears team. Robert Quinn would be named to the Pro Bowl for the 3rd time in his NFL career. The last time he was named to the Pro Bowl was in 2014 when he played for the St. Louis Rams. That is how long ago it was when he last made the Pro Bowl. But, of course, congratulations for him for clawing his way back and making it there. And then sitting right behind them, the reserve that was voted for the outside linebacker position would be Shaquille Barrett. The starting linebacker for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers out of Colorado State will be named to his 2nd Pro Bowl. The last time he made the Pro Bowl was in 2019. Not to mention that he is a 2-time Super Bowl champion in 2 different teams as well. But this being his 3rd year on the Buccaneers, is the 2nd time in his 3-year stint on the Buccaneers that he's been a Pro Bowler. Shaq Barrett would go on to finish this most recent season with 10 sacks in 15 games for a Tampa Bay Buccaneers team that finished with the 2nd best record in the NFC. The Buccaneers would go on to meet their end in the divisional round by a field goal to the LA Rams. So that is how Shaq Barrett was able to make it to this team. Looking at the AFC players that were named to the outside linebacker, who were named Pro Bowlers at the outside linebacker position, the 2 starters are TJ Watt and Joey Bosa. TJ Watt, the elite starting defensive end for the elite starting linebacker for the Pittsburgh Steelers, will be named to his 4th consecutive Pro Bowl, as he was named to the first team All-Pro for the 3rd consecutive year. After he will go on to lead the league in sacks for the 2nd consecutive year, tied with Reggie White and Mark Gastineau for the NFL record. He would also tie Michael Strahan for the most sacks ever recorded in a season, as he had 22.5 sacks in 15 games played for a Pittsburgh Steelers team that finished with the 7th best record in the AFC. He would actually be the first player to score in their game against the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC wildcard game this season. In addition to his 22.5 sacks, he would go on to finish with 5 forced fumbles, tied for 5th most in the league. He had 3 fumble recoveries and 7 passes defended, all in his 64 total tackles this season for the Steelers that made the playoffs this year. And then sitting alongside TJ Watt will be Joey Bosa, the elite starting defensive end, the elite starting outside linebacker for the Los Angeles Chargers out of Ohio State, who was the 3rd overall pick in the 2016 draft, will be named to his 4th Pro Bowl in his first 6 seasons in the NFL. This will be his 3rd consecutive season in which he's made the Pro Bowl for the now Los Angeles Chargers. Joey Bosa would finish with 10.5 sacks in 16 games for an LA Chargers team that finished just outside of the playoff picture with a 9-8 record. He is one of 6 players from the Chargers that would be named a Pro Bowler this season for what he had done so far. The AFC reserve will be Matthew Judon, the elite starting linebacker for the New England Patriots, will be named to the Pro Bowl for the 3rd consecutive year. This past season, Matthew Judon would go down and finish with 12.5 sacks. He was tied for 7th in the NFL in sacks on the year. He also had 60 total tackles. He also had a fumble recovery as well. He would put together a Pro Bowl performance, and he would be one of 4 players from the New England Patriots that would be named to the Pro Bowl this season. So congrats to Matthew Judon proving to be a recurring name at this position in this stage. And then the alternate that was named was Harold Landry, the outside linebacker for the Tennessee Titans, who was a 2nd-round pick in 2018, would be named to his very first Pro Bowl in his NFL career. Harold Landry III would finish tied 10th in the NFL in sacks, as he had 12 of them in 17 games. For a Tennessee Titans team that would finish at the very top of the AFC, they ended up clinching the first-round bye. He is one of 4 players from the best team in the AFC this regular season. He had 75 tackles on the year, and alongside his 12 sacks, he was also able to force a fumble for the Titans this year. So those are the players that would be representing the outside linebacker position. Looking at the players that were representing the inside linebacker position, starting on the NFC side, the leader in tackles would of course be the starting middle linebacker would be Micah Parsons for the Dallas Cowboys. The elite starting linebacker who just came off of his rookie year out of Penn State would be named the Pro Bowler. He would be named to the first team All-Pro, and he would be given the Butkus Award, given to the best linebacker in the country. As a rookie, he would go on to finish with 64 tackles. He would be tied for 43rd in the NFL in tackles. He finished with 13 sacks on the season as a linebacker. He finished 6th in the NFL in sacks total. He would finish third amongst linebackers, as TJ Watt and Robert Quinn are technically linebackers. And with his debut season, Micah Parsons definitely shot himself into superstar focus. He was one of 6 Dallas Cowboys selected to the Pro Bowl. His backup in the Pro Bowl will be Bobby Wagner, the elite starting linebacker for the Seattle Seahawks. Will be named to his 8th consecutive Pro Bowl in his 10th season since being a 2nd-round draft pick in 2012. Bobby Wagner would finish with 170 total tackles in 16 games for a Seattle Seahawks team that would completely miss the playoffs this year with a 7-10 record. And of course, being named to the Pro Bowl for 8 consecutive years is no small feat at all. And the alternate that was named at the inside linebacker was Devin White, the starting linebacker for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who won them the championship last year, would be named a Pro Bowler for the very first time. He was named to the 2nd team All-Pro in 2020, the year that the Buccaneers won it, but this is officially the first time he made the Pro Bowl. Devin White finished with 128 total tackles on the year. He finished tied with Deion Jones for 10th in the league in solo tackles, as he had 87 of them. He would also go on to add a couple of sacks and 8 tackles for loss for a Tampa Bay Buccaneers team that would finish with the 2nd-best record and dominate the NFC South. They had the 2nd-best record in the NFC. They would meet their end with a field goal from the Los Angeles Rams, as the Buccaneers are the most represented team in this game. Also, taking a look at the AFC players that were named to this game, or at least the starter at the inside linebacker position that was voted initially was Darius Leonard and is Darius Leonard. The elite starting linebacker for the Indianapolis Colts out of South Carolina State would be named to his third consecutive Pro Bowl. This was also the third time that he was named to the first team All-Pro. This will be the fourth consecutive season that Darius Leonard was named to an All-Pro team in his fourth season this year. Darius Leonard would finish with 122 total tackles in 16 games this season. He was tied for 21st in solo tackles as he had 75 of them. He led the league in forced fumbles this year as he had 8 of them. He also recovered 2 of them. He finished with 4 interceptions as well as he tried to do it all for an Indianapolis Colts team that finished outside of the playoff picture. They finished with a 9-8 record as they were half a game behind the 7-seed Indianapolis Colts. But of course, Darius Leonard was doing what he did to show that he was one of the best at what he did. The reserve at middle linebacker will be Denzel Perryman. The starting linebacker for the Las Vegas Raiders, who just joined the team this year, would be named to his very first Pro Bowl since he was drafted as a second-round draft pick in 2015. Denzel Perryman would go on to finish with 154 tackles this year. That was 6th in the league. In solo tackles, he finished tied for 3rd with 102 of them. He was also able to force a fumble and recover 2 of them. He did all this for a Las Vegas Raiders team that finished with the 5th best record in the AFC. They met their end to a field goal from Cincinnati in the final play to eliminate them from the playoffs. He was, of course, tied with Devondre Campbell from Green Bay and Foyesade Olokun of the Falcons for the 3rd most tackles in the NFL, but he's played 2 less games than Olokun and 1 less than Devondre Campbell. Of all the players that had at least 100 tackles, Denzel Perryman did so in the least amount of games, just to get a sense of what Denzel Perryman was doing this season. So that's the inside linebacker position. Taking a look at what's going on in the secondary, starting off in the NFC. The starting cornerbacks will be Trevon Diggs and Jaylen Ramsey. Starting off with Trevon Diggs, the elite young starting cornerback for the Dallas Cowboys in his second season on the team, would be named to the Pro Bowl after he led the league in interceptions and was named to the first team All-Pro. Trevon Diggs, even though he would be responsible for allowing the most amount of yards against him as a corner, he would lead the NFL in interceptions. He had 11 of them. He would go on to finish with 2 pick sixes. He was one of 3 players this year that had 2 of them. The other 2 players being Mike Edwards of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Rasul Douglas of the Green Bay Packers. He did all this for a Dallas Cowboys team that won the NFC East and finished with a 3 seed in the NFC. The other player that was named was, of course, Jaylen Ramsey. Jaylen Ramsey would put together, like I said, very solid season for a Los Angeles Rams team that is still competing in the playoffs at this very moment. Jaylen Ramsey would be tied for 12th in the league in interceptions as he had 4 of them. He would go on. He's had 62 tackles on the season and also forced a fumble and recovered a fumble for this Rams team that's made it all the way to the Super Bowl. He is one of 4 LA Rams that was named to the Pro Bowl this year. Looking at the 2 players that were named his reserves, one of them was Darius Slay, the elite starting corner for the Philadelphia Eagles. Darius Slay would finish with 3 interceptions this season, not to mention that he would also finish with a pick 6 this year. He would finish with 40. He would do all this in 40 games. He would finish with 40 tackles for a Philadelphia Eagles team that finished with the 7th seed in the NFC East for the time being. They met their end in the very first round against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Darius Slay finished with 9 passes defended on the year. And of course, with Darius Slay being named this season, this would be the 4th time that Darius Slay was named to the Pro Bowl in the last 5 years. He missed it last year, but he made it the previous 3 years before that. And then alongside him in the reserve will be Marshawn Lattimore. The elite starting corner for the New Orleans Saints will be named to his 4th Pro Bowl in his last 5 years, his 3rd consecutive Pro Bowl, as he would do his best for a Saints team that just missed the playoffs. Marshawn Lattimore would finish with 3 interceptions and 19 passes defended. He finished 3rd in the NFL in passes defended for a New Orleans Saints team that would finish just outside of the playoff picture with the 8th best record in the NFC. And then, of course, while I'm on just passes defended, looking at how Stefan Diggs fared, he finished 2nd in the league in passes defended. He had 21 of them. And then Jaylen Ramsey would go on to finish with 16 passes defended. He was tied for 6th in the league. The player that was voted as an alternate in the NFC at the position would be Stefan Gilmour, the former NFL Defensive Player of the Year. This past season for the Carolina Panthers, Stefan Gilmour would go on to finish with 2 interceptions on the year for a Carolina Panthers team that just missed the playoffs. He would go on to be one of 2 players represented by the Carolina Panthers in this matchup. But Stefan Gilmour would be named to his 5th Pro Bowl in his career in his last 6 seasons since being a first-round draft pick in 2012. This is his 4th consecutive Pro Bowl that he's made, of course, showing that he's still one of the best corners in football. Looking at the players in the AFC that were voted into this year's Pro Bowl, the 2 starters will be J.C. Jackson and Xavier and Howard. J.C. Jackson, after being undrafted in 2018, will be named to his very first Pro Bowl after he was named to the 2nd team All-Pro in 2021. He is also a Super Bowl champion. He won with the Patriots when they beat the Rams in 2018 in Super Bowl 53. But J.C. Jackson, in getting to his very first Pro Bowl as a player, would finish 2nd in the NFL in interceptions. He had 8 of them for a New England Patriots team that had the 2nd best record in the AFC East. He finished with 44 tackles, and he finished with 23 passes defended, which led the NFL in total. So we put together a really good season. Starting alongside him will be Xavier and Howard. The elite cornerback for the Miami Dolphins out of Baylor will be named to his 3rd Pro Bowl in the last 4 years. He was named last year as well after he led the league in interceptions last year. However, this year, Xavier and Howard would be tied for 4th in the NFL with interceptions as he had 5 of them. One of them was even a pick 6. He would force 2 fumbles and recover 2 fumbles as well, as he had 50 total tackles for a Miami Dolphins team that finished outside of the playoff picture with a 9-8 record. Congratulations to Xavier and Howard for making that team. Coming as a reserve off of the Cleveland Browns, named was Denzel Ward. This will be the 2nd time he's made the Pro Bowl. The last time he made the Pro Bowl was 2018. Denzel Ward individually would go on to finish with, he would go on to finish with 3 interceptions on the season for a Cleveland Browns team that just missed the playoff picture with an 8-9 record. He finished with 34 total tackles and 10 passes defended on the season. And alongside him making his 2nd appearance will be Kenny Moore of the Indianapolis Colts. After being undrafted in 2017, he will go on to make his very first Pro Bowl appearance. He will make it this season. Like I said, it was a very long road for him to make it here for an Indianapolis Colts team that just missed the playoffs. Kenny Moore, the 2nd, would finish with 4 interceptions alongside a sack, 82 total tackles in football, as I believe he was tied for 15 in all defenders in tackles. He would finish with 13 passes defended as well, and he even forced a fumble for the Colts. So, of course, he would do everything that was needed of him to do so. Looking at the safety position in the NFC, I'm starting off with the strong safety. The starting strong safety will be Budda Baker of the Arizona Cardinals. The the second round pick out of 2017 out of Washington, will go on to make his 4th Pro Bowl in his NFL career. The elite safety has made his 3rd consecutive and 4th in the last 5 years, just to get a sense of how dominant Budda Baker really has been. Budda Baker would finish the season with 63 solo tackles. He had 98 of them on the year. He would finish with a couple of sacks, even a fumbled recovery. He would even finish with 3 interceptions for an Arizona Cardinals team that would squeak their way into the playoffs, but they would end up losing in the very first round to the LA Rams, as Budda Baker would end up getting trucked and he would have to end up getting stretched off the field. But of course, Budda Baker would still be named a Pro Bowl this season. I have no idea if he's going to play, but he's one of 4 Arizona Cardinals that was selected. And starting alongside him in the safeties, or as a safety, will be Quandre Diggs of the Seattle Seahawks. The former 6th-round pick out of Texas, out of the 2015 draft, will be named to his 2nd consecutive Pro Bowl. In his season with Seattle, he would tie with Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, and Kevin Byard, as well as Justin Simmons, and Xavier McKinney for the most interceptions among safeties, as he had 5 of them for a Seattle Seahawks team that completely missed the playoffs. He finished with 94 total tackles. He also would finish with 7 passes defended for a team, like I said, that just completely missed the playoffs, but he proved that he was one of the best safeties in football. Looking at the players that are going to be reserved, the reserve at strong safety will be Harrison Smith. The elite starting safety for the Minnesota Vikings will come into this matchup, making his 6th Pro Bowl in the last 7 seasons. He missed the 2020 Pro Bowl, but he made it this season. He would do all this for a Minnesota Vikings team that just missed the playoffs with an 8-9 record. Harrison Smith is one of 5 Minnesota Vikings that was represented in this Pro Bowl selection. So Harrison Smith would prove he was one of the best safeties in football. And then the alternate safety that was selected was Antoine Winfield Jr. from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The second-year player out of Minnesota and the former Super Bowl champion would be named to his very first Pro Bowl this season. Antoine Winfield Jr. would finish with 62 total tackles solo tackles. He had 88 tackles on the year. He had a couple of sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 3 fumble recoveries, and he was also able to finish with 2, like I said, he also had the 2 interceptions on the year. He did what he could to create havoc for a Tampa Bay Buccaneers team that would finish with the 2nd best record in the NFC and the best record in the entire NFC South, as they were the only team to represent their division in the playoffs. Of course, he was a very big part of that reason. So, of course, with this, he would be named to his very first Pro Bowl in his 2nd year. Looking at the players in the AFC that were named to the Pro Bowl at the safety position, the starting strong safety will be Derwin James. The elite starting safety for the Los Angeles Chargers out of Florida State will be named to the Pro Bowl for the 2nd time in his 4-year career. He was named a Pro Bowler in his rookie season in 2018. He was not named since because of injury. But so far this season in 2021, Derwin James Jr. would go on to finish with 118 total tackles on the season. He would go on to finish with 22 total tackles as well. In total tackles, he would go on to finish 3rd among safeties behind Minkah Fitzpatrick and Jalen Thompson total. But his 75 tackles would also sit him behind Minkah Fitzpatrick, Harrison Smith, and Jalen Thompson, and he would be tied with Adrian Amos for 4th, and Jeremy Chin, and for the 4th most tackles among safeties this season for a LA Chargers team that just missed the playoff picture this year. And not to mention that Derwin James additionally was able to add 2 sacks, 2 interceptions, 3 forced fumbles, and he was able to do what was needed for this Chargers team, despite the fact that they didn't make the playoffs. Looking at who's going to be starting alongside him at free safety is going to be Kevin Byard of the Tennessee Titans. Kevin Byard would go on to make his second Pro Bowl appearance after being a third-round pick in 2016. The last time he made the Pro Bowl was 2017, where he was the NFL's interceptions co-leader. This year, he was also named to the first-team All-Pro for the second time in his career since 2017 as well. Kevin Byard would go on to finish this season with 5 interceptions, tied with Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, Quandre Diggs, and Justin Simmons, and Xavier McKinney for the most interceptions among safeties this season for a Tennessee Titans team that finished with the best record in the AFC, and he would be one of 4 players representing that team. He finished with 88 total tackles on the year, 1 sack, 2 forced fumbles, a fumble recovery, and he was also able to finish with a defensive touchdown on the year, and of course doing a lot for the player that came out of mid-Tennessee playing for the Tennessee Titans. And then the one player that was elected as a reserve safety Pro Bowler would be Tyrann Mathieu, the elite safety for the Kansas City Chiefs. The former third-round pick from 2013 will be named to his 3rd Pro Bowl, his 2nd in a row. He was named last year, but last year the Chiefs were playing in the Super Bowl, so he wasn't able to play. This year he's actually going to be able to play. This past season, the Honey Badger Tyrann Mathieu would go on to finish with 3 interceptions at the safety position. He went on to finish with 76 total tackles, a sack, 3 fumble recoveries. He even finished with a defensive touchdown for a Kansas City Chiefs team that finished with the 2nd best record in the AFC. They met their end in the AFC Championship game on a field goal in overtime to the Cincinnati Bengals. Those are the players that were voted, at least on the offensive and defensive side. And we're slowly going to work our way through to the special teams. Looking at the NFC, the special teams that's going to make up the NFC, the punter that's going to be representing the NFC will be Brian Anger for the Dallas Cowboys. The former 3rd-round pick in 2012 out of Cal will be making his very first Pro Bowl appearance. He was also named to the 2nd team All-Pro this year as he helped the Cowboys finish with the 3rd best record in the NFC. He's one of 6 players from the Dallas Cowboys that would make this team. Also sitting alongside him, or the starting place kicker, will be Matt Gay. It was selected to be Matt Gay from the Los Angeles Rams. He was selected to his very first Pro Bowl season after being a 5th-round pick in 2019 in his very 3rd season in the NFL. He helped the Rams make it all the way to the Super Bowl, as it was his kick to get the Rams to the Super Bowl in the first place. Not to mention that it was his kick to get the Rams past the Buccaneers through the divisional round as well, just to get a sense of how important Matt Gay was for the Rams this season. But since Matt Gay won't be able to kick, the alternate will be Jake Elliott for the Philadelphia Eagles. After being a 5th-round pick in 2017, this will be the very first time that Jake Elliott would make the Pro Bowl as a kicker. The return specialist will be Jakeem Grant out of Chicago, or for the Chicago Bears. The return specialist out of Texas Tech will be starring in his very first Pro Bowl. He made the 2nd team All-Pro for the very 2nd time in his NFL career this year, as he made it last year as well. The one special teams player that the team will have will be J.T. Gray from the New Orleans Saints out of Mississippi State. This will be the very first time that he's made the Pro Bowl, and he would go on to make the first team. He made the first team All-Pro this year after he made the 2nd team All-Pro in 2019. And then the long snapper will be Josh Harris, the 2nd player representing the Atlanta Falcons this year out of Auburn. He was born in Germany. He would go on. This will be the very first time he will be in the Pro Bowl after he was 2nd team All-Pro in 2021, after he won the BCS National Championship in Auburn in 2010. Looking at the players that are going to be representing the AFC on the special teams, the punter will be A.J. Cole III, the hometown punter for the Las Vegas Raiders. He is one of 4 players that is going to be representing the hometown team. After being undrafted in 2019, this will be the very first time he's made the Pro Bowl, and it's the first time he's been named to the first team All-Pro as well. Alongside him, The place kicker for the AFC will be Justin Tucker. The elite place kicker for the Baltimore Ravens will be selected to his 5th Pro Bowl in his career. This will be his 3rd straight. He's also made the first team All-Pro for the 5th time in his career as well, because he did go on to make the longest field goal in NFL history this year, a 66-yarder. The return specialist will be Devin Duvernay from the Baltimore Ravens. He will be one of 5 players that was selected this year. The wide receiver out of Texas will be named to his very first Pro Bowl this year, as he was named to the first team All-Pro for the very first time in his career. The special teams player will be Matthew Slater for the New England Patriots. The 36-year-old will be named to his 10th Pro Bowl in his career, as he has made 10 of the last 11. The only Pro Bowl he's missed since 2011 was 2018. So, of course, another golden star for Matthew Slater. And then the long snapper will be Luke Rhodes for the Indianapolis Colts. The long snapper out of William and Mary will be named to the Pro Bowl for his first time. He was named to the first team All-Pro for the first time this year, after he was named to the second team All-Pro last year. And that's everything I have for you for this Pro Bowl preview for the 2022 Pro Bowl. Once again, today is Sunday, February 6, 2022. I want to thank everyone for listening to all 92 minutes of this piece. And I want to congratulate every single one of these players that has made this list. It is no small feat to be named a Pro Bowler in any season, especially in the very first season that was expanded to 17 games. Congratulations to every single one of these players, as we are entering a new era. And we're ushering in slightly new era by era of the NFL. And congratulations to all these players. And I can't wait to see these dudes play today. And then after today, they will not be picking up the pads until the summer. Thanks for listening again. Thanks for following with me this 2021 NFL regular season and this 2022 playoffs as well. I'll catch you with more tomorrow, and we'll see how this Pro Bowl roster changes up this time next year. Thanks for listening to this piece. I hope all is well, and peace out.